From the headquarters of Tell Us Your English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Saini Gray. We begin in Argentina, where students and union workers have hit the streets of La Plata again to reject the government's austerity plans and police repression. A provincial strike has been declared to ensure workers' participation. Argentine police brutally suppressed a workers' protest in La Plata using rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse demonstrators. They sought to speak with an authority in the Buenos Aires governorate about worker negotiations. At least 15 people were injured and 5 were detained in the violence on Tuesday.
A new wave of violent repression by security forces against protesters. This time against the mobilization at La Plata City in Buenos Aires, in which the workers of the Rio Santiago shipyard protested against the closing of this very important plant for the construction of ships in Argentina. This mobilization came after the ignored complaints made by the workers to Buenos Aires' governor María Eugenia Vidal, and ended up in clashes with the police. Many people were injured by rubber bullets and even police cars. Some people were arrested. The reason that workers remained outside the Buenos Aires governor's office asking for explanations. All this took place only a few meters from the place in which the funeral of Chicha Mariani was taking place. She was one of the founder grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo. The events have been rejected by some human rights groups. This is part of the difficult situation lived every day in Argentina, and comes as a response against the repressive neoliberal policies applied by Mauricio Macri, and today by the Buenos Aires governor, to prevent people from protesting against layoffs and social inequality.
The IMF has finished its visit to Argentina, having made the first revisions to the standby agreement signed by Mauricio Macri's government.
Going to the International Monetary Fund means deepening the neoliberal politics of the Cambiemos Alliance's government. As days go by, the measures showcase even more the adjustment politics that the government is implementing.
Since we welcome the International Monetary Fund, the government does not govern. It gave up its power. Mauricio Macri is a puppet of the imperial power. The current accusations against former Christian officials is a strategy on the part of the CIA, with local intelligence services, along with newspapers like La Nación, trying to distract people.
In the midst of the economic crisis, the $50 billion credit line now forces adjustments of the economy. These guidelines must then be followed so the country meets the goals set by the IMF.
The IMF are going to impose conditions like labor reform and more fiscal adjustments. We all know how this is going to end, just like the crisis of '89 or the worst economic crisis in 2011.
During the visit of the IMF's technical team, Macri's administration sought to temporarily improve elements of the economy, but failed at doing that.
There's no productivity in the country. Our economy continues to worsen. And it seems that Macri lives in another world. He came out and said that nothing is wrong, and that's a lie. Workers lose every time.
To comply with the agreed-upon goals, Argentina must adhere to severe adjustments worth over $19 billion. They include cuts on retirement funds, public works, and subsidies. The return of the IMF is an experience that people in Argentina have experienced before, and everything indicates that social tensions will only worsen.
The former Argentinian President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner is facing the Senate over a corruption case. Senator Fernández arrived to the Senate, where a search on her properties will be voted on by its members. A corruption scandal against her broke out in early August, and with next year's presidential election approaching, the scandal could hurt her efforts to oust the country's current leader, Mauricio Macri. Over 4 million Venezuelans have received their voucher for the transition to the new currency. Thousands of Venezuelans have taken to the streets to support the economic measures that took effect on Monday. They later gathered to hear an address from the President of the Constituent National Assembly. He insists that this is a new dawn for the country. He also condemned the opposition for trying to divide the people at a time of economic recovery. And the members of social and political movements have held a march in support of the newly announced Economic Recovery Program.
Since early in the morning, people started gathering at the center of Caracas to voice their support for the economic measures. They say they are hopeful that the new economic policies will bring positive change.
We are gathered here with joy and above all with the will to back these measures, to defend this program, and we are taking to the streets in celebration, along with the people and the institutions, to protect this reform.
People are showing off their new sovereign bolivars. They denounce the economic sanctions on Venezuela and believe this new monetary reform will set them free.
The youth has long played an important role in the Bolivarian revolution. Today we are at the forefront and we will battle to support all the economic measures of President Maduro.
As people headed to Miraflores Palace, the Vice President of Economic Affairs made new announcements.
We just had a very important meeting with businessmen from the national agro industry. We have signed an accord with them to strengthen productivity and protect the stability of prices from across the country.
Agroindustrias más grandes y productivas de Venezuela.
As the Venezuelan economy takes a path to recovery, opposition groups continue to paralyze the country for their own interests with little support.
The August 4th assassination attempt against President Nicolas Maduro continues to reverberate through Venezuela. Analysts believe such a desperate act by opposition groups makes evident their diminished political power. On the final part of our special series, we take a look at what the attack meant.
Marcos Terugi is an expert in Latin American studies. He's a sociologist who lives in Venezuela and has witnessed many of the most important events of the past years.
There have been 4 elections in less than a year, and Chavismo won those 4 elections. The right-wing lost because of their political disability, their lack of unity, and their lack of strategy. That same right-wing does not recognize their own shortcomings and will do whatever is necessary to regain any power.
They showed this with the assassination attempt against President Maduro. Terugi now takes pictures of where the attack took place after having reported on it. A terrorist act that happened just as the president was giving details about the economy. Terugi assures that the perpetrators were trying to force the end of a democratic government.
The economy will stabilize with this recovery plan if the government can stop the increase of prices, make sure there is stock of important supplies like medicine, and the salaries have a direct relationship with prices. The drone attack makes evident the desperation of the opposition to stop this from happening. If there was a right wing with actual leadership, they wouldn't have to do these kind of things. What we're seeing today is a weakness in the opposition against a government that has political support.
This is a new post-capitalist model that will help us overcome the aberrations of the ultra-liberal economic war model that has destroyed your income, your purchasing power. The time has come, and when I said those same words was when the bomb exploded. Do you remember? The time has come for the economic revolution, so all of us can rebuild our nation.
Oppositors to the administration of Nicolás Maduro insist that their intentions are good, but reality seems to contradict them.
They have tried different strategies, coup attempts, sabotage, financial warfare. They have tried to make Venezuelan politics just like Colombian politics.
Experts highlight that it is not only well-known politicians who constantly attack Venezuela, but there's also a constant stream of fake and exaggerated news items about Venezuela on a daily basis.
Time now for a short break. We'll have more news in a few minutes.
Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. We start this section in Brazil, where an indigenous woman is running for office for the first time. Her historic campaign is revealing just how unrepresented indigenous people are in Brazilian politics.
Sonia Guajajara is running for the vice presidency of Brazil, but she's not like any other candidate. She is the first indigenous woman ever on the ballot. She is running alongside Guilherme Boulos from the Party of Socialism and Freedom. Guajajara heads numerous indigenous organizations and is also a mother of 3. She believes it's time for people like her to have a space and a voice in the government.
If we wait for others to do the job for us, we won't get anything, because our representatives have different priorities. So we can't expect things to get better. We can't expect things to be different for us if the representatives are always the same people.
Sonia's running is shedding a light on the lack of representation of indigenous people in Brazil's politics. In fact, only one indigenous man has ever been a member of the National Congress, and that was in the 80s. This year, there are 131 native candidates running for governor, senator and for Congress. A record number, but unlikely prospects for the vote. Débora Duprá, a Brazilian jurist, says indigenous people continue to be marginalized in all aspects of society, not only in politics, but also in schools, universities and industries.
There's a generalized view that indigenous persons belong in the woods, and that's racism. We are still a racist society, refusing to accept that indigenous, black people, LGBT, women are individuals with full rights.
2017 was one of the worst years for indigenous rights in Brazil. A record number of killings related to land conflicts and the worst precedent regarding land demarcation policies. Guajajara and Boulos both intend to fight for the rights of indigenous communities, and their electoral bid is already historic and important for the almost 900,000 indigenous people in Brazil. Mi Alberti, Telesur, São Paulo.
And staying in Brazil, where an LGBT leader has been killed, Marcos Cruz Santana, a 40-year-old social activist and the leader of the LGBT community in the city of Bahia, was killed. According to authorities, they are still searching for the killer and they are investigating the motive behind this crime. The president of the gay group of Bahia said the murder of Cruz Santana is the most concrete expression of homophobia. Colombian citizens see the newly elected comptroller as a clear example that the ruling political parties are not interested in reforming themselves, and they seek to remain in power by forming alliances with old rivals.
According to Senator Angélica Lozano, the new comptroller would be at the service of the hegemonic political class. She warns that the selection process must be improved for future elections.
The upper class won, the former presidents, the big political parties, and the past won, as long as we fail to separate institutions like the comptroller's office from the interest of the ruling party. Our country will continue to be an imitation of democracy.
The Democratic Center lost their first battle in Congress when their candidate, José Félix Lafouré, was defeated. Such a result showcased the division inside the party.
Gana Carlos Córdoba.
Carlos Córdoba won. He actually comes from the old political class and is closely associated with former Vice President Germán Vargas Lleras, who seems to be gaining a second life in politics and who seems to have made an agreement with Uribismo to hand Córdoba victory.
The new controller said all parties have been given guarantees and that his office will work transparently. But according to analysts, this is doubtful, given that 37 members of Congress couldn't vote because they are linked to different processes within the controller's office.
This election once again shows there is an alliance between political parties to elect their own friends to avoid being investigated.
According to Andrés Hernández from Transparency for Colombia, it's important that the new controller regains the confidence of the Colombian people and that he leads an efficient fight against corruption.
The new comptroller must have their priorities in order. They need to get definitive results in the issues that are affecting the people and government institutions.
Opposition parties assure that they will closely follow the actions of the new controller, as well as his future decisions, hoping this remain unbiased.
Carlos Felipe Córdoba.
The Ecuadorian government has announced more austerity measures, eliminating another 20 ministries. President Lenin Moreno also announced an increase in fuel prices, among other new economic measures. Moreno says his plan is aimed at reducing public spending, but critics believe it will have a negative effect on unemployment. According to local media, it will result in the loss of at least 900 jobs. Small and medium-sized Ecuadorian enterprises are concerned about the recent economic law passed in the country and say that the measures benefit few commercial sectors.
The family company Caral has spent 30 years dedicated to the business of producing machine parts for the food, chemical and industrial sectors. Its president expressed his concern about the economic measures that have been taken.
Small and medium-sized companies are going to be unfairly punished by these measures. We just want to be allowed to work, but we'll be forced to put a lot of our effort and resources into following bureaucratic red tape. These requests may work for big companies, but are too much for small businesses.
Caral is one of the affected companies. They are asking President Moreno to evaluate the reality of the situation for medium and small businesses.
It could be easier for us to close up, sell our machinery, and simply import our products. It would be the law of less effort, with low costs. If we do that, it will cause a chain reaction across the whole industry that sooner or later will lead to the country's deindustrialization.
For the Chamber of the Small and Medium Businesses in Pichincha, this law doesn't address the current demands of businessmen. They say that the reduction in consumption and employment is due to the construction of the state.
Small and medium business represent 95% Ecuador's business network. What percentage of the debt forgiveness benefits will help us? In written numbers, it may seem beneficial, but in actual cost, not so much. It's only big companies who will truly benefit.
Around 1,500 national companies are operating in Ecuador, and according to the director of the CAPEIPE, several companies have had to close this year because the government hasn't been able to sufficiently address the needs of small business entrepreneurs. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
The Trinidad-Venezuela gas development deal was supposed to have been signed Wednesday, but the earthquake that struck both countries on Tuesday afternoon forced its reschedule. The deal, which is officially between Trinidad's NGC and Venezuela's PDVSA for the development of gas from the Dragon field, will be signed on Saturday instead.
As a result of what happened, because as you know that the seismic activity yesterday was actually right off of the coast of Venezuela, etc., in communicating with the government of Venezuela last night, and I think up to about 10 o'clock last night, a decision was taken that the Prime Minister will lead a delegation of certain ministers and NGC. We are going to invite members of the media to accompany us to Caracas on Saturday morning.
Chilean algae forests are resisting climate change. In a recent expedition, scientists took a deep dive into the waters of the Magallanes region of the Chilean Patagonia to study how different marine algae species react to climate change. To their surprise, the gigantic forests of algae are reacting well to the drastic changes in their environment as a result of incoming fresh water from melting glaciers. The Mexican government has announced that an agreement with the U.S. on the North American Free Trade Agreement is imminent. Both sides have been holding talks since last month to settle their differences over NAFTA. U.S. President Donald Trump has long complained that the accord hampered manufacturing in the U.S. while benefiting Mexico. He has also threatened to dump the accord if it is not reworked to the advantage of the United States. And Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto and President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador are preparing for the transition of government. During their latest meeting, they have tried to hash out their differences on important issues such as education.
The outgoing president and his successor are beginning the transition process. The men were flanked by current cabinet members and the president-elect's designated ministers when they met recently at the National Palace.
I'm the first one to admit that security hasn't improved and that it will be very difficult to revert insecurity rates.
The controversial airport project was also high on the agenda during the 2-hour-long talks.
It will be Mexicans who will decide. This is a democratic process that is meant to solve these issues.
The longtime rivals, however, did not shy away from their differences on a number of issues. In fact, Peña Nieto defended his education reform plan, which the incoming president had rejected.
We'll present our plan to abolish the reform and to start a different plan.
Both presidents were questioned about the former head of the National Education Workers Union, Elba Esther Gordillo, who has been cleared of money laundering charges.
Our education system doesn't match the times we're living, the new voices.
There were attempts to link Gordillo to López Obrador's government. He has denied these allegations from his opponents. It's still left to be seen who she will support after she rejected the education reform, which goes against teachers' rights.
It's time for the second break of the newscast. We'll have more news in a bit.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud, amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.